5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Here we go. It's game time. Unforgettable.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Welcome to Sports and More, where almost anything goes. Coming to you from the marsh just outside of Edmonton, Alberta, here's your host, Dean Millard.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Nice to be in orbit.
But Puljujarvi now has confidence, and here's the strange thing, Dean. Ken Holland won't just trade him for the sake of it. He'll say to Yessi, hey, no one wants to give me what I think you're worth, so if you want to be in the NHL, come to my team. That in itself is a compliment to him.
Do you think that could happen?
I think it's a small, I would say, like, in September, I thought zero chance. I would say in the summertime, because Puljujarvi's now a year older, he's more mature, and like all of us, time heals your frustration. We all make mistakes and a little bit, and maybe he felt, unwanted. Dave Tippett comes over and he's like, oh, geez, now the team's competitive. We're like, hey, Yessi, this is, how I see you. And he would look, if he was smart, and his agent, they would look and say, well, look at how players were used last year. No one's pigeonholed, right? If you're playing well, you're going to play. Right. If you're not playing well, you're going to go up or down, and that's how it works. And most guys want, now, if he thinks he has to be guaranteed top 6 minutes, well, I don't know, some team might lie to you, but then he'll get that on a bad team, and a bad team will likely be willing to pay for him because he's going to be 22. Most Finnish players, Dino, don't really make impacts in the league. Like Patrick Laine was a big outlier.
Hello there, and welcome to Sports and More, episode 34. My name is Dean Millard, and on this show, almost anything goes. Welcome. Thank you very much for downloading. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on what time it is you're listening to this. I'm just glad you have chosen to download it. That was Jason Gregor of TSN 1260 talking about the future of Jesse Puljujarvi, and Gregor is our featured guest today. We're going to talk about the Edmonton Oilers. We're going to talk about Puljujarvi. We're going to talk about Alexander Ovechkin as well. Gregor makes a fairly compelling case whether or not Ovi can catch Gretzky in the goal department. The Eskimos will come up, his career, which has a very interesting story behind it. Farm life and more with Jason Gregor. Coming up in just a few minutes. But before we get to that, we have to get to our top three.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff.
Let's go! Time for your top three.
Liftoff and the clock has started.
Roger, 0G, and I feel fine.
Beautiful, beautiful.
So today our top three, which as always is presented by Ultimate Franchise Fantasy Sports. Fantasy sports are great, and now with Ultimate Franchise Fantasy Sports, it's more realistic than ever. You can own one of only 31 professional fantasy hockey franchises in the world, 23-man rosters, 27-player reserve list to stockpile for the future, daily roster moves, a wickedly unique playoff format. And they're not just players on your roster, they are digital assets. Use digital currency to buy and sell players, build a championship team now, or you can stockpile for the future and win great rewards of digital currency. Only a few franchises left of the 31 available, and you can get your own by bidding right now. The website to go to is www.airauctioneer.com/UFF sports NHL fantasy franchise auction. Open your free account, make your bid, and you'll be notified if you are outbid. In this format, you own the game, so get in the game. This is what we're going with in our top three topic today. we have Jason Gregor on the show. So we're asking your top 3 sports talk shows or podcasts. I'm going to go with podcasts because that's what I'm doing right now. But there's a lot of people out there that are picking the Jason Gregor Show for sure. My honorable mention, I'm being a homer, it's Sports Night. The show I used to host with Hernan Salas on TSN 1260 before Countrywide Cutbacks led me down the podcast path, which I am a lot more happier. No offense to TSN 1260, but I'm not at a radio station until midnight, Monday to Friday, and whatever time on Saturday night. So what was a very tough thing to happen to me in the beginning is turned into a lot of fun and starting to have some good success with a podcast alley. So my honorable mention is Sports Night. That used to be the show that myself, Connor Halley, and then eventually Hernan Salas hosted on TSN 1260. And I'm going all podcast the rest of the way. I love a lot of shows on TSN 1260, but I'm going podcast. The number 3 podcast I'm going with is 31 Thoughts. Elliot Friedman, Jeff Merrick. Elliot is one of the most plugged in guys that is out there. So that's an entertaining one. Number 2, my good friend Guy Flaming and the Pipeline Show. If you want to know about prospects, it's one of the best out there. So Guy does a great job with the Pipeline Show. And number 1, I'm going with 2 Guys and a Goalie, Dustin Nielsen's podcast for Oilers Nation. It's a lot of fun. It's entertaining. Joaquin Gage and Matt Cassian, they do a great job. It's very entertaining. Hernan Salas works on that show as well. So I would love to hear from you on what you love as far as sports talk radio shows or podcasts. You can hit me up on Twitter at Duck Millard, or you can also email the show, sportsandmorepod@gmail.com. News and Sports says The Lowdown with Low Tide, The Jason Gregor Show, and Inside Sports with Reed Wilkins, 1 to 3 brackets. I like the rest of the YEG sports shows, by the way, as well, it says. Ken Lou says Low Tide, Wilkins, and Dave Jameson. And then also replies, obviously, if you still had your evening show, you would be second on my list. Sorry, Dean, Low Tide is freaking hilarious. Hey, man, Low Tide is a very funny and a great guy as well. Very, very genuine. That's for sure. So there you go. That's the ultimate franchise fantasy sports top 3 topic for this week. Your favorite sports talk shows or podcasts. And you can get more details at www.uffsports.com. Duckman's Dominators is my team in that league. I'm having a lot of fun learning about it, and it's going to be amazing because not only do you own the players now as digital assets, but there's going to be something when they retire. There's going to be like a legacy league. There's so much coming with Ultimate Franchise Fantasy Sports. It's really exciting. And we've got some great stuff at Podcast Alley as well. We have Tyler Remchuk this week on the Prospects Baseball Show with myself and Jordan Blundell. You will also hear Playing Pepper later this week with Tyler Remchuk of TSN 1260. He is the producer on the Lowdown with Low Tide. Nathan Meissen of Fire and Flower, the VP of Government and Stakeholder Relations. He joined me last week on the Cannabis 101 podcast. We also did One Hitters with Nathan, where we get to know him. And later this week, Marcy Kiziak, the president of Nova Cannabis. You're going to love this conversation. She joined me earlier this week. That will come out Wednesday on the Cannabis 101 podcast. We also did One Hitters with her. And One Timers with Jason Gregor will come out a little bit later on this week as well. And of course, if you would love to get in touch with us, you can. sportsandmorepod@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter at Duck Millard. Well, that's my Twitter handle. Instagram, Sports and More Podcast. Facebook, Sports and More 35. And as mentioned, you can email me, sportsandmorepod@gmail.com. And you can get full episodes and more at sportsandmore.ca. All right, before we get to Jason Gregor, I want to remind you we have the Acme Meat Market Trivia Contest coming up later in the show. A gift card from Acme Meat Markets will be up for grabs. You can go and say hi to Corey, Amanda, and their wonderful staff in the Ritchie Market, 9570 76th Avenue. Check out their website, acmemeatmarket.ca. Your hint is Gregor's Oilers prediction. What is the prediction Jason Gregor will have for the Edmonton Oilers? That is your hint to try to win a gift card from Acme Meat Market. All right, just before we get to this interview, and it's a fun one with Jason Gregor, let's get to know him just a little bit more with the bio.
Time for the bio.
Jason Gregor was born in Grand Cache, Alberta, but grew up on a farm just outside of New Sarepta and Leduc. He graduated from the French immersion program at J.H. Picard High School in Edmonton, but didn't jump into broadcasting right away. He spent 8 years in the oil field before taking the broadcasting course at NAIT in Edmonton at the age of 27. Even before graduating, he started working with Edmonton radio legend John Short at Oldies 1260, now TSN 1260, as a producer, Eskimos beat reporter, and salesman. His first show was a weekly one called The Gridiron Show in 2002, before starting Just a Game a year later. In 2004, he joined then Team 1260 and hosted a nightly show from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. and formed his own company a year later. Eventually, he expanded to 9 p.m. to midnight before moving to middays in 2006 with the Jason Gregor Show, heard currently from 2 to 6 p.m. on TSN 1260. Jason and his wife Tracy have a son named Beckett. Gregs, it's great to have you in studio here, man. It's been a long time I've wanted to get you in here and talk about, because I think you have such an interesting career path. And we were just discussing, as people heard in the bio, I didn't know a lot about this oil field career that you had before broadcasting. And that's the thing I love is you know, in TV, 30 seconds was a short amount of time. And then in radio, 15 minutes, you know, you have a 15-minute segment. And these podcasts I do, I love being able to tell a little bit of a different story and maybe a longer form and get to know the people. So thanks for coming in, man.
Hey, buddy, thanks for having me. I love the room here, all the different jerseys, and you even supplied a Big Turk. So
I was wondering when you were going to notice that.
I've seen it. I'm like, this is the longest I've sat with a Big Turk in front of me and not eaten it.
I don't know how fresh that is. My wife found it. She's a Big Turk fan, so we'll just warn you.
I don't think there's ever a Big Turk that's been bad. Like none of them will be more than a month old because they're so popular.
All right. Okay, big popular topic in Edmonton right now is Connor McDavid. You were down there talking to him today. You know, we saw last year he goes into the net and we hear about this recovery, and then he gets hit by Giordano and you see him really upset, and then he gets rammed into those boards. I mean, there must be a lot of really concerned Oiler fans right now just about, you know, is this guy gonna, because he's so dynamic and he's so fast, the only way to stop him sometime is to try to knock him off balance into the boards.
Yeah. Like, I thought the Giordano one was really overblown by people. Like, I watched that replay 100 times. That's a minor penalty at best. That's all it is. It's a minor penalty. Should they have called it? Sure. And I get that McDavid in the Times pissed because he was mad that he wanted a penalty. Yeah. That's all he wanted. I talked to him about it afterwards. You know, the crashing into the boards is a different thing because, you know, he's at high speed, although it wasn't like that was the fastest he skated that individual moment. But you know what? He has a bruised knee and really nothing more this time. I understand the trepidation because it's a great player. And, you know, if Edmonton had been in the playoffs regularly, this, I don't think it would be the same, but there's such still an angst amongst the fans, and understandably so, that they're just like, hey, you know what? McDavid just got injured last year, and thankfully for them and him, he didn't have to miss any regular season games.
Right.
So the fact that the players were joking kind of about it in the locker room, he's got a peg leg, that to me shows that I think he'll play. I would be surprised that he won't play. And, you know, it's just a contusion. We call it a bruise, whatever, Charlie horse. Anybody who's ever played any sport has gotten a Charlie horse, and it's painful. but it's not debilitating. It's not structurally any sort of damage. And I think he'll be fine. He'll probably have to deal with a little discomfort, but he also has state-of-the-art training facilities. They'll get all the best treatment to bring the swelling down quicker than it will for even 10 years ago athletes. So I think he'll be fine long-term, but it's scary. It's the NHL, sadly. I know Vancouver fans are all upset about Elias Pettersson lately, and they have right to be. But newsflash, the NHL, for whatever reason, believes that the star players, they need to fight through the weaker players. Like it boggles my mind. It makes no sense.
It's why Mario Lemieux called it a garage league at one point and wanted to quit, or did quit.
Yes.
And it's, is it a big deal if McDavid doesn't play, if he misses one game? I know the Oilers need him and it's a really tight race, but in the long run, if he misses one game,
the
Oilers if it's better for him.
You know what? Yeah, they're not going to rush him for sure. If he has to miss a game, he will. When you look at their lineup, it still illustrates, like, a lot of people have been debating this for months. Like, they need another scoring winger more than they need a third line center. Like, because Riley Shahan's playing pretty well as a third line center. So even if you get like the best third line centers, how much production are they getting? But you look at a top six winger, a legit one, like Zucker just got traded, and a lot of people thought that guy would have fit in, right?
I thought so
I
too.
Get so, but salary cap's an issue that Ken Holland's having to deal with. So I still think, even as a rental, like Ilya Kovalchuk on this team right now, right, especially with Neil out, and
the price is right.
Skater, 100%. So I think that's what they'll look for. Athanasiou, I know he's having a terrible year. The guy can flat out fly. He did score 30 goals. I don't think he's a 30-goal scorer. I think he's a 20-goal scorer. And they don't really have a lot of, like, other than James Neal, they don't have a 20-goal.
20-goal scorer on your second wing is pretty good.
Is playing wing, so he's a 20-goal scorer. But they really don't have a lot of them. So I think they could use more for sure. And I would still say that's the biggest one, because if they're one injury away from being that thin in your top six, like your bottom six, you can figure it out. Like, the gap isn't as big as if you lose someone in your top six, at least in my eyes.
Another big topic is the Darnell Nurse contract. What do you think?
I don't mind it for either side, to be honest. I think Darnell Nurse gets $5.6 million for 2 years. Like, he talked today about, they were talking about a 5-year deal, and there was never any discussion about $8 million. I know that Jim Masson tweeted once that it's not a comparable. It was never really used.
It was also talked about Zach Cassian was a $4 million player.
Yeah, exactly. And so you look at Nurse. I think at the most he would have got on a long-term deal is $7 million at the most, right? But on a 5-year deal, I'm talking maybe like 6.8 or 6, because it goes down, right? So let's say he signs for 2 years, and now in 2 more years they're going to re-up him again. And let's say by then it's a 6-year deal or something. Fine. I don't think he's suddenly jumping up to $8 million unless the salary cap explodes to the alleged $95 million and such. Well, if it does, well then sure, it's all different. But everybody's going to go up at that point. So I think he's betting a little bit that the cap goes up. Good for him. But if not, his next deal is, let's say, 6.5 or whatever it is. I don't think he's really lost that much money. He's still making $11.2 million over 2 seasons. Like, he's good. The Oilers, they've got some cap certainty because his raise basically comes from Brandon Manning's contract and Eric Greiba's $300,000 that's still on the buyout, right? So it's a small little area that Ken Holland really, he re-signs Nurse, but because he's losing that other money on contracts that aren't helping the team, he's no worse off and arguably better off. So that's a good sign for them. They've also got Jones under contract already. Bear and Benning need deals. Benning's not going to get a raise. And Ethan Bear, this is one where Ken Holland is, if he wants to flex his muscles, he can, because it's the one time you don't have arbitration for a player, and that's just the business. It's not personal. It's the business. You try to use it to your advantage. And I'm curious to see, what they'll do with Bear. Or will they try to get him on a long-term deal like an Oscar Klefbom that turned out very well for the Oilers down the road?
Concern at all that this deal walks Darnell Nurse right into unrestricted free agency?
A little bit, but you know what? How many really good players hit the market every year? Right, that are under the age of 30.
Yeah, no, yeah,
right?
it's a small amount,
Yeah.
and if he likes it here and they've had success, you have a better chance at retaining him for a longer term deal.
He is very tight with McDavid and Draisaitl, and he's also a very important leader. I talked to Alex Chase about it, and he said he's a very upbeat guy, he's a very positive guy, and he's vocal, and he's the one player in the room that if something uncomfortable needs to be said, whether it's to the low guys or if it's McDavid or Draisaitl, he's probably the one guy that could say it. Like, Messier used to tell Gretzky stuff. Kevin Lowe used to say stuff to Gretzky. And that's important. You need guys that he respects enough. Not that McDavid wouldn't respect other guys, but some people don't have it in them to say the uncomfortable thing. It's hard to do. Right? Like 80% of us don't want to have the uncomfortable conversation with a coworker.
Most of us don't want conflict, right? Yeah.
So, and it's not necessarily even conflict, but you're right. In that moment, it'd be like, hey, Connor, you have to back check for I'm just using an example because it's harder to say that for the player
anybody.
Who does everything, right? So, and I think Nurse has that capabilities, and that's a hard thing to really put a price point on. But the other thing is, if you look at Darnell Nurse, from last year to this year, he's 10th in the NHL in 5-on-5 points for defensemen. 10th, right? And he was the 107th highest paid defenseman. Even with his new contract, he's going to be in the 40s for highest paid D-man. So he's not a bad contract at all. I think it's a fair contract.
I really think the Clefbaum injury last year made him elevate his game and all that power. And I thought he was getting way too many minutes when Clefbaum was out, and I thought he was going to burn out. And I don't know if he really ever did. So I think it was like, okay, you have to take on this responsibility, and that's led him to be able to step up even more. But I really think it forced him into that. If Clefbaum doesn't get hurt, maybe he isn't thrust into those situations and hasn't taken these steps forward like he has this year.
That's totally fair comment. And the thing is, you look at Nurse, he plays the most minutes 5-on-5. Like he plays 5-on-5 and penalty kill, whereas Clefbaum plays all three, but he doesn't play as much on the penalty kill because he's on the power play. And we all know that the power play minutes are a little bit less taxing physically on you. So, you know what? It's good for Nurse. He's also, I think some people, he's still helping Ethan Bear. Right? Like Darnell Nurse isn't that much of a veteran, right? And Bears talked about how Nurse helps him in a lot of ways more mentally than anything else. Just how he builds his confidence, how he talks to him. Also, like Darnell Nurse was like a proud big brother when Ethan Bear was chucking the knuckles with Matt Tkachuk. Like you listen to Nurse, like he gets generally just like, it was so awesome, right? And he went out of his way to make sure that he tells Ethan Bear that, right? And we all know Ethan Bear doesn't have to fight, but you've played, like making team unity is from things like that. Like, oh, hey, nice pass, great. But when you want to stand up for yourself, it creates such a bond amongst teammates.
He seems like he's kind of the straw that stirs the drink as far as team chemistry and things like that. He's not pulling what McDavid's doing, and McDavid, we all know what he does, but kind of that stirring the drink. Another guy who seems like that is Zach Kassian, who also got a new deal. And as I mentioned, I don't think he was a $4 million player that was bantied about, but that's a pretty good deal.
Oh,
especially
really
the third year.
Yeah, I thought it would only be 3 years, and he got 4.
Yeah, right? Sorry, the fourth year. I mean,
and so
sorry.
that's one that may be down the road, but that's usually what happens when it's unrestricted free agents. And Ken Holland, the thing I respect about Holland is he doesn't try to sugarcoat things. He says, "Hey, I'm going to make a bad signing," because every GM does. Like you don't know which one it is. Some that you think are really good, and 2 years later or 3 years later, some that you thought would be look really good, and some you thought would be awesome don't look awesome. So you just got to hope that you have more good ones and fair ones than you have bad ones. And Kassian's skating ability is what's going to allow him to be in the NHL. He's physical. He's also a really raw guy. And make no mistake, for Zach to get his life in order is somebody he can talk about just life skills to other guys and young players. And I think that's something that probably gets overlooked, right? And Zach's not one who, and him and I have had this conversation. I said, like, you're an inspiration to people because there's a lot of people who deal with different type of addictions. And he's like, well, you know what? Like, he doesn't feel like he's anything special in doing it. And that's just kind of his mentality. But I'm like, you're right. But the fact, and he goes, why I overcame it doesn't mean the next guy will do it the same way, or a girl. But the fact is that they see that you did it, still playing in a high 10, because some people could do it where not everybody knows about it.
Sure.
Right. So, and that could be good or bad. But I think the human side of sports sometimes gets overlooked. And I just read a book called The Captain Class. And it talked about, and it outlined the 7 greatest teams in sports history, right? And you know what? Now, of course, like any debate, you're like, well, why is that one in there?
Sure,
now?
yeah.
But it had hockey and basketball and football and baseball and the New Zealand All Blacks, and it even had cricket and others, volleyball and different ones. But it talked about leaders and different things that they did, and it was far from their best players all the time, and just different personalities, and how even though a guy was a leader on their team, and some were captains, and then even leading up to the time that they weren't the captain and how important the role was. And it was a fabulous read by Sam Walker, who really believes in analytics too, because I find some people, it's like don't discount analytics. Yeah. I agree. But then analytics people don't discount the importance of emotion.
Yeah. Every little bit contributes to 100%. Team success.
Yes.
You don't win an emotion alone or grit alone.
Yeah.
You have to have skill, and you have to have the research behind it. I think in today's game anyway.
100%. You need all of it. And you know what, we'll see. Like, there are some teams like the Houston Rockets. They're the outlier on analytics. Like, they've gone so far to everybody shoots three, and we don't they don't even got anybody who's big now, like in basketball terms. So it'll be fascinating.
What do you think of Ken Holland's grades so far? In this 3/4, half of a season, just in the off-season work. I guess Holland Tippett, the combo. Do you give him a pretty high grade so far?
Oh yeah. Well, you look, they're in a playoff position, right? He got rid of Milan Lucic for James Neal, so that's a massive win.
Even that alone is such a huge move.
Archibald, Shahan, Nygaard, Haas have all worked out. Granlund's the only one who didn't. So, you're batting 80% on contracts right now. He's going to need some short-term deals again. He's stuck to his guns. Bouchard's not up here. And
waited on Yamamoto and Benson.
Yeah, but they're also gaining a year of the slide rule because of Bouchard's birthday when he was signed. So his entry-level contract doesn't officially kick in till next year, right? So, it's not disappointing for Bouchard, I guess, in a small sense, but he'll be under contract technically for 4 years, right? So it's one of those small little things, and he hasn't rushed any of their players. He's been very patient, even in December when the orders hit the skids. He didn't freak out about it. So, even the Mike Smith signing, like a lot of people question, and now Mike Smith's numbers aren't great, but man, he's a battler. He's competitive. I think, 7-0-2 in his last, how many starts? So he's finding ways to win games. And at the end of the day, wins, I always will take wins over goals against average and save percentage for a short term. I know that in the long term, eventually you need the save percentage stuff, but I think Smith's attitude as a competitor rubs off on people, and I still like Costin's overall game. I think he's calmer, but for now you're riding Smith, and I'm going to be curious to see what Holland does at the trade deadline. I don't think he's going to sacrifice too much, but at the same time, the Pacific Division's wide open. There's no dominant team, and the Oilers might be the favorite because they got the two best players. So does he look and say, hey, if I had one guy, we could win one, maybe 2 rounds. That's huge for playoff experience for the core guys. Obviously, for the business bottom line, like they're desperate to make the playoffs and win a round. Let's make no mistake about it. And then Tippett I've liked because he's pretty just even keel. He's not afraid to call out players in a very professional manner. He knows he's really good at the human element of stuff. And, he seems to push the right buttons. People are like, well, why is he starting Smith? And then Smith would win. And then why is he moving this guy up? And Josh Archibald score. Like, remember in Vancouver, like, why is Josh Archibald playing with McDavid? And then he scores his first goal of the year, right? So his players, he seems to make them want to reward him.
And he's teaching them that, you're going to score more by preventing more and creating turnovers and things like that. And the fact that Ken Holland hasn't called up players, I mean, how many years did we look and say, why is this guy here? Why is this guy called up? Why, Jesse Puljujarvi goes down for 4 games and then comes back up. And there's a trade chip that Ken Holland hasn't rushed and overreacted to use and maybe has it at the deadline. I don't know if there's teams that'll trade for Puljujarvi at the deadline, but maybe at the draft or whatever. But he has not rushed that trade chip.
At the draft that's when teams are feeling like, okay, here's a good chance for me to rebuild our team or retool our team. So, and Puljujarvi's averaging a point a game in the Finnish Elite League. And I know some people try to poo-poo that league. I'm like, I'm sorry. I've talked to so many scouts. It's basically on par with the American Hockey League.
That's what I've heard too.
There's no question. Now, it's a bigger ice surface, so it's a different style of game. Now, that's a valid concern that can he play on the smaller ice surface?
He still seems to be a bit of a rover.
Yeah, but Puljujarvi had no confidence. And I remember at the end of last year, people kind of laughed at me when I said, actually, if we're asking in all seriousness, where's the best place for him? I said it's in Finland because he couldn't play in the American League. He wasn't going to clear waivers. And if he started in the NHL, well, he wasn't going to start on the top line with Cassian there. He wasn't going to start in the second line with James Neal or Chason coming off 20 goals. So he was starting the bottom 6 with no confidence. Now, Tippett's a different communicator. He could have got out of him, maybe. But Puljujarvi now has confidence. And here's the strange thing, Dean. Ken Holland won't just trade him for the sake of it. He'll say to Yessi, hey, no one wants to give me what I think you're worth. So if you want to be in the NHL, come to my team. That in itself is a compliment to him.
Do you think that could happen?
I think it's a small, I would say, like, in September, I thought 0 chance. I would say in the summertime, because Puljujarvi's now a year older. He's more mature. And like all of us, time heals your frustration. We all make mistakes and a little bit. And maybe he felt, unwanted. Dave Tippett comes over and he's like, oh, geez, now the team's competitive. We're like, hey, Yessi, this is, how I see you. And would look, if he was smart and his agent, they would look and say, well, look at how players were used last year. No one's pigeonholed, right? If you're playing well, you're going to play. Right. If you're not playing well, you're going to go up or down, and that's how it works. And most guys want, now, if he thinks he has to be guaranteed top 6 minutes, well, I don't know, some team might lie to you, but then he'll get that on a bad team, and a bad team will likely be willing to pay for him because he's going to be 22. Most Finnish players, Dino, don't really make impacts in the league. Like Patrick Laine was a big outlier.
Timo Solani, right? The jersey up there.
22-year-old rookie.
Right?
76
goals in his 20. I remember me and my buddy were in the library at Crocus Plains High School reading the hockey news because in 1993, that's how you got your hockey news. And on the cover was all the salaries for the 93. And we were like, who the hell is this Solani guy? Like, we never heard really. There was no internet, so you didn't know. And then he comes out because he was older and has the greatest rookie season of all time.
And look at Mikko Koivu.
Yeah.
Look at the Sedins, how many years it took for them to really establish themselves. Like, it's a big transition coming from the bigger ice to the smaller ice and just maturing. And, there's so many players like that. So I think it's way too early to write off Puljujarvi because most people are gauging him on what he did in a league when he shouldn't have been there. Make no mistake, the Oilers screwed this up.
Yeah.
Pre-Ken Holland.
Yeah.
I argued it for years. He was not ready, and he's proven it. And that doesn't mean he can't be ready at 24 or 23, but he wasn't ready then to be a impactful player in the NHL.
Biggest difference this year to last year, and what do you think the Oilers might do at the deadline?
Biggest difference to me is, well, number, I think it starts at the top. I'm a big believer in the triangle theory, leadership, and it rolls downhill. And Ken Holland and Dave Tippett have come in, and more. And not that Tippett and McLellan are that much different. He's a little different communicator for sure. But Ken Holland compared to Peter Chiarelli, it's night and day. He's got an open door policy to a lot of people. He's just more of a communicator. I think he's calmer. And also, it's just you look and say, okay, well, what's he done? Well, he's come in and he traded Neil for Milan Lucic. It worked out right away. He signed guys, gave them opportunities, and they've all performed and worked well. And Tippett says, hey, if you play well, you're going to get chances here. Everything they've said, they pretty much backed up. And I think the players all want honesty and transparency and said, we're not rushing young guys. They didn't rush anybody. Yamamoto came up when he was ready. And look at him now. And he didn't start in the first line the first game, right? And then he moved up. He did start with Draisaitl, but it wasn't, he played 8 minutes his first game. Then he moves up. Draisaitl was kind of splitting time, and then they moved up, and that line clicked, right, when they put Nugent Hopkins there. So great. And I think that, to me, it's more so the leadership from the team. Also, I will say this. I think their two big dogs are a little bit more invested in their 200-foot game.
And I think that probably comes a lot from coaching too, a little bit maybe. And
a lot of it comes from just the players realize, you know what? And Dave Tippett, I think, would tell them that flat out, said, hey, guys, if you do it,
that's right.
There's no excuse anyone else can't do it.
Goaltending for me on ice has been, it just was not there last year. And I think this year, I don't really know if either goalie, Mike Smith had a little bit of a rough patch there. But other than that, I think goaltending on ice is one of the biggest reasons why they're in a playoff position.
Well, Mikko Koskinen, and I think people forget Mikko Koskinen up until like when the first 50 games of the year, Koskinen had a 910 save percentage. You'll take that. Like this year, the average is like 905, I think it is, right?
Weird,
because there's more goals, so that's fine. And I think for many years we got inflated save percentages. That didn't mean the goalies were that great. It's the way the game was. There was not many great chances, so the game's opened up now. Awesome. And just because you're a 905 or a 910 doesn't mean you're any less of a goalie. Just there's more goals. And Koskinen's not fatigued because he died in this when they played him 27 starts or 25 out of 27. Ridiculous. And so that won't happen. But I am very curious to see what happens down the stretch and then who gets the when the Oilers, and I expect them to make the playoffs, who gets opening night start on the playoffs?
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating debate for Oiler fans. We learned in One Timers that you love watching Ovechkin.
Yeah.
Craig Laughlin tonight on the Capitals broadcast says he thinks Ovechkin might be the last guy to get to 700 goals in the NHL. What do you think?
I never thought of that. Like, I didn't think anyone would ever catch Gretzky.
Yeah.
So.
Do you think he has a chance at catching Gretzky? I mean, he has to average like he has to play till he's like 39.
Yeah, I think, Ovi's in great shape. I think he could play 5 more years. And, I kind of crunched the numbers. Let's say next year he goes down to 45.
Mm-hmm.
Then he can go to 40. Then he can go to 34. Then he can go to 30 and then 28. Like, it's not like outlandish numbers when you think of Ovechkin.
Wow.
Right?
Wow. When you break that down like that,
Yeah.
it
like, seems very realistic.
It seems like he could score 28 in his sleep.
Yes, totally. So health, and he's always been pretty healthy. So that helps him. I really think he wants to go for the record. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Yeah.
And he
especially now that he has a cup.
Right. He has a cup. They could win again this year, right? Like, he seems just like excited as ever. He's got that excitable personality. I don't think he loses that.
No.
And the fact that Gretzky came out and said he'd love him to break the record.
Wow, that's incentive, right?
So I think he has a chance now. Can someone else score 700? That's, you know what? Like, we're seeing goal scoring tick up a little bit, right? Like, you look right now, Draisaitl's going to score 40 goals again this year. Right now, you know what? That's a long way to go to get to 700, right? Austin Matthews, Patrick Laine, those guys are pretty good goal scorers at young age. So 700, like, I don't think anyone's going to get 800. It's hard, but I didn't think anybody would do it before. So it'd be a decade at least, right? At least before anyone even gets close. But Laughlin could be onto something. Like, it's hard to score that many goals because the big one is health.
That's right.
Can you stay healthy? And then are you that good with goal scoring?
Yeah. Last one on the NHL for a bit. Olympics. They've kind of reopened this door again. Theron Fleury said, don't you think Connor McDavid wants a gold medal or something like that? And, there was the argument that, well, what if Connor McDavid gets hurt? Well, you can't live your life like that, or else nobody would leave their house.
Yeah.
So the Olympics, I think, is a good thing. The owners, maybe not so much. Do you think the Olympics is worth it?
See, and that's the interesting one to me, because I look and say, okay, the NHL played in the Olympics, right, in 98, in 2002, in 2006, in 2010, in 2014. How, I would like to know, and then the owners would have it, how much growth did they really get from it, right? So, because if you have the World Cup of hockey every year, you have it in the summertime, and you still get best on best.
You wouldn't have that every year.
No, not every year, but you could do it every 4 years,
or
if you
even
wanted,
two
like
if
the
you
Olympics,
wanted,
right?
yeah,
Or
yeah.
every 2 years, because remember they used to have the Canada Cup, 91 and 87, and they did it every 4 years. People thought that was fantastic, but they never thought the Olympics. Now I get that the Olympics in a lot of cases has the best of the best, sure. So I understand why, it looks, but the NFL doesn't have it, right? Major League Baseball doesn't do it. So is it really hurting your league? That's the one that I don't know the answer to, honestly. Is the NHL somehow losing globally? Because I'll say this, Dean, I don't really buy into the theory that you can become global. I don't, the travel costs, I don't think it works. You would have to start 6 teams at one time in Europe, and you don't have enough elite players to do that right now, to expand to add another 6 teams. So if you're only going to have 1 or 2, it doesn't make the travel any sense. And unless you're going to really relocate 6 teams, which is the only way you could do it. I just, like, all this talk is great, but I look at the sporting landscape, Dean, and maybe I'm different than most people. That sports is in for a big awakening. You look at fans are staying away from the NFL. They're staying away from watching games live more than ever.
Sure.
And so it's about the games on TV. Now, maybe that's why they will go globally, because there's just not enough people in North America anymore who are that interested in watching enough games.
So got to get people to watch it.
So they'll watch on TV, but then you've got time zone, right? How many people, you look at 8-hour difference, whatever it is.
It's like 9 hours to Finland.
Like, I really don't know if the NHL needs the Olympics that bad, other than I know players got in it before. But if you go back to having, the World Cups and the Canada Cup, like the World Cup, and you make it the best teams, because guess what, Dean? You and I both know there's only 8 teams. Like,
That's
I know
right.
that you get 12 in the Olympics, and that's awesome. But we know that the bottom 4 teams, like, good for them.
There's only a top 6.
Yeah. There's
And
really
barely.
Yeah. Well, maybe top 7, because the Swiss is always competitive. right? Like they're always competitive, and Germany's coming. Like Germany's got a lot of young players coming.
They're going to have a couple of really high-end picks this year.
So they'll be better, but that's still 10 years until.
But
those
right
guys
now
are in
there's
their 20s.
6.
Yeah, probably 6. Right? 'Cause
I don't think
Slovakia's
Slovakia's in that top 6.
They've kind of fallen off.
And
a
the
bit.
Czechs, sometimes you never know, right? At the World Juniors, there's not even 6 almost, right? Like when you look at the World Juniors, there should be a top 6, but when's the last time the Czechs really made a whole lot of noise?
Early 2000s,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, when they won, I think the back-to-backs.
I think they won 2 golds.
Yeah.
So I'll be honest, I don't think the NHL needs the Olympics as much as, like, I see a lot of people, the NHL is closed-minded. I'm like, that's you thinking that somehow if the NHL is not in the Olympics, like they didn't go in 2018, did we see massive drop-off, right?
No.
Like, it sounds dumb, but the Summer Olympics would work the best for the NHL, but it'll never happen.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Soccer might be the only global sport, right?
Yeah, well, basketball is cool, but soccer for sure. I think is.
But
the
I
one
mean,
that
like with like the
with all the continents, and it's competitive everywhere.
And they have a World Cup that is best on best every 4 years. So that's probably the only sport.
It's the only one because
and
everybody play. A lot of the other sports,
you need cleats and a ball.
Yeah, and the other sports are very much continent driven in a lot of cases.
Yeah. Let's talk Eskimos quickly. Coaching staff, looked like they were asking a bunch of people and were getting turned down for interviews, and then lo and behold, Milanovic comes into this. I was surprised. Were you surprised by the naming of Scott Milanovic?
A little bit, because he was under contract in the NFL, but I think that looks to run your own show. He
knew things were going to be done in Jacksonville.
Yeah.
Like the way they were going, he wasn't going to be there next year because there's going to be a new coach.
So that's smart of him. He comes in. He's got a lot of experience. There's no question about it. Interesting because, a new defensive coordinator, which I didn't kind of expect, but, Lawley had the personal decision. That's what they're telling us. So that was a little surprise. I was happy kept AJ Gass. I think continuity is huge in coaching in football, just like it is in any sport. You keep turning over stuff.
I think he's a young, bright mind too.
Yeah, and the Eskimos, because now you don't have to learn a whole new system again. Right? You're going to have some changes on offense. There's going to be some changes on defense for sure. So that'll take some time. But overall, I think their staff's okay. Like, I'm very intrigued by free agency because one of the biggest weaknesses on the team last year was they didn't have a guy who was a playmaker in the red zone as a receiver. Or I shouldn't say that. They had a guy, they didn't use him in DeVaris Daniels.
Okay, yeah.
Well, now he's gone, right? Or he's leaving, from what I understand. So who's going to be that, right? Like they don't have that big play guy in the red zone. Right. And Harris isn't a massive, consistent, deep threat thrower, right? He likes to go down the field. Great. So now the field shrinks when you get inside the 20. So you need somebody at some point. You just throw the ball up and he goes and gets it. They had a Darius Bone. Tucker was a great route runner, right? Then you had Duke Johnson. You had Zylstra. You had a lot of big playmakers. Darrell Walker, right? Like big playmakers.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they can't get any, then where are they at in that department? So that's a concern for me, as well as who's going to be their middle linebacker. And really, who's going to be their linebackers? Anumba and Larry Dean aren't coming back.
You get to know Ed Hervey. I got to know Ed Hervey. I'm sure you got to know Jason Moss a little bit. What do you make of these two guys and their post careers, and Ed as a GM and Jason as a head coach?
Well, Ed obviously won a Grey Cup in Edmonton, so he's had a pretty good start to his career. Last year did not go well for the BC Lions. For a variety of different reasons. But when you're the GM, you got to own that. So
that's right.
There's very few GMs, I think. It doesn't matter how big or how small the league is, that are going to have success all the time. Right. And so, I think Ed, if you gave him some true serum, would be the first to tell you that, he might have bet a little bit too much on too many veterans, thinking that they could relive their youth a bit. And that didn't happen. So, it's funny. The Eskimos and the BC Lions, the two biggest playmakers in free agency, didn't do much. And I don't care what league you're in. You're rarely building your team through free agency.
You overpay.
Yeah, well, you overpay, but it's continuity and everything. And look at the Bombers. They didn't do anything. They kept their team. Continuity matters at times. Now, obviously, they made the Caleros trade after the injuries, and he played a pretty big role in it,
That's
no question.
So strange,
sure,
like that story.
Jason Moss, I think, is a fantastic football mind. And when you have so many players talk about him that way, it's hard to argue. I think Jason at times was, if there was one knock at him as a head coach, I thought he didn't crack the whip enough on discipline the guys who took penalties.
Sure.
And now he did things like he would run with them, like he tried to show like, hey, but there it's like, you know what? sometimes it's just like if he would have sent a message to a veteran in week 2, not a rookie, a veteran who's taken all the penalties, you're sitting down. And the first time it's a quarter, the next time, and all of a sudden guys are gonna be like, okay, because now playing aggressive and you're gonna take the odd penalty, but it was the pre-snap penalties
And after.
snap, and those
The
are it's
undisciplined
like, you
ones.
want to play hard, and guess what? We'll live with an unnecessary
Play to
roughness
the
call,
whistle.
but it's the after the whistle stuff, and you're constantly taking penalties like that. Just there was way too much of that last year, and so that's something he can learn from. But I think Jason Moss will be a head coach again in the league, just because he's well respected, and he'll go to Saskatchewan, and Dickinson's a little bit calmer. I think you can always learn different things, but Moss will be back as a head coach. I have no doubt in my mind.
I sometimes wonder if some guys are just meant to be coordinators, though. Richie Hall comes to mind as maybe he's just a better coordinator. And I wonder if Jason Moss, at least right now in his career, is too emotional to be a head coach and needs to have somebody over top of him right now because he obviously is almost too emotional at times, or was.
And you know what? Do you know, it's great that you said that, because you're right, he was. The thing was, you look at last year, Jason Moss didn't freak out once, but people still bring it up. And it's funny how some people don't want to change their perception, right? And it doesn't matter as human beings. It's like, it's hard to want to look and say, okay, his perception changed. But Jason Moss was rarely the fire. Sure, every now and then, like he gets on every coach in the league at some point is going to yell at the referee. And so when Moss did, it's like, oh, here he goes again. I'm like, no. Everybody else is doing that once or twice a year. You're allowed to do that. That's fine. You're going to get upset. Come on, that's a call, whatever. And, like I talked to a few officials, and yeah, his first few years, he talked to officials too much. They said, you know what? Of all the guys who's calmed down, it was him the most, right? Like Ken Austin never did, and the officials despised him. Moss was one who had conversations, and they said, hey, man, like, some self-growth, which, we've all had that at some point in our life, where you hopefully you have a good boss who sits you down one time and says, hey, you know what? You got to look at this. And you're like, well, screw you. But then you go back and you're like, okay, all right. And away you go. And I think Moss learned that you can't change who you are, but you can change how some people look at you. And you watch Moss in 2 years, that perception, only people that don't want to admit growth will continue to think in the future that Jason Moss is still the fiery guy, right? It's going to be a funny thing. He might do it once a year, but most coaches do it once a year.
Yeah, a lot of coaches flip the garbage can in the dressing room.
Sure.
You can't do it all the time because it wears off. All right, let's talk some non-sports stuff. You went away recently, and you turned your phone off for like the entire week.
12 days, buddy.
Wow.
Love it. I do it when my wife and I first, when we went on our honeymoon.
Yeah.
And we went to Maui on our honeymoon, and I walked into our hotel room, and back then it was the old phone that had a battery. And I just turned the phone, and I just took the battery out. And she's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I told you, I don't have my phone on. Because she didn't believe it, because I run my own company on my show and stuff, and so I need my phone on. But at times I feel like I don't like it because I feel like, I got to look at my phone all the time. And all of us, I think, are guilty of that. And so once I did it the first time, I'm like, this is really freeing for me. And I told my wife, I'm like, why don't you do it? Well, I have to take pictures. I'm like, no, you don't. You have a camera. You have a really good professional camera. That's right. Yeah. Right? Now it's harder, right? And so I told her, I said, the next time you're shutting off for 2 days in a row, like off, never on. And so some people because to me, I'm connected on social media a lot through work.
Yeah.
Right? Like, not as much personally. Like I do have a private Facebook account just for my family stuff, because I like to do that. But even there, I'm barely on it. Most of my social media is all for work. So when I'm on holidays, I don't want to be on work. I don't want to be looking at Twitter. I don't want to be looking at Facebook. Or Instagram. I just want to relax.
Especially if you're in Maui, all the beautiful things to look at.
And so for me, it was really nice. Now I'll be honest, because of my work, I check my emails on a laptop.
Sure.
And I told my business people when I left on a Saturday, I said, I'm going to check it because it was 2 Thursdays I was gone. I said, I'll check it on Thursday. So if you really need something, send it to me on Wednesday. I'll get it on Thursday.
Sure.
If you send it to me on Friday, you're not going to get it till the next Thursday.
Yeah.
Right. And I sent that out, and the first few times I did it, it was very freeing. And now I look forward to it because it's amazing how less angry, less upset, and less feeling like, oh, I got to look. Like I read 6 books. I'm a big reader. I like it, right? And I read a lot of different books, but I just found I was like, and when I came back, I had to do some research for sure. It's for my job, but that's fun research to me. Like I'm a stats guy. I love looking up stuff. And so I taped the games and I would fast forward through them and watch different ones. And, it was funny because my mom and my mother-in-law were the ones who said, on the Wednesday, hey, the Oilers game's tonight, the rematch.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like, can you get it? And I'm like, well, it's not on TV, but so I got like a temporary NHL for a week package.
Yeah.
So we watched the game, but it was more. Now, obviously, I'll watch it because I'm a hockey fan.
Sure, yeah.
Right, and I love that the rivalry.
But you weren't
back.
sitting down every night watching hockey.
I didn't
or
watch
anything.
No, I didn't watch anything other than that one game on holidays.
We went camping this past summer in Crown Land out by Nordegg in that area.
Okay.
And there's no service.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, my phone lasted for like 2.5 days without charging it.
Totally,
because I wasn't on it all the time.
Yes.
I was taking the odd picture because it's awesome out there, but I wasn't on my phone checking. And we listened to music, and that's about it. And I just said to everybody, I'm like, oh my God, this is not. I really have to try to do this more. It's hard. It's especially when you're a business, but. Dude, if I won the lottery, I'd be gone off social media. If I didn't have to be on social media, I don't think I would be.
Yeah, but it's not even social. Well, it is social media for a lot of people because personal Instagram and stuff. But for me, honestly, like now, like I've weaned myself a lot. When I come home from work, I put my phone in my bunk and I turn my ringer on because I'm like, you know what? If people really need to get a hold of me, they'll call me. Like if it's a real emergency.
That's right.
Because a lot of us feel like, well, geez, I can't miss something. Like what if I miss a text? But I'm like, I'd rather be like, in the moment with my son or my wife, or if I want to watch a show and I don't want to watch a show, and I try, like even some games now I'll watch and I won't have my phone on because I don't feel the need, because I'm like, well, now I'm watching closer for different things, and then I'll make a comment or two at intermission or something like that, and I find that I'm watching the game better. And so I've had my phone off, and now like I told her, I said I want to have Sundays as no phone day for as long as you can, and I'm like, tell your friends and turn your ringer on if they really need to talk to you, because people will send you stuff that's insignificant and you're just like, and then they're like, why aren't you responding to my text? I'm like, because it's not that important. Like you just asked me whatever. I don't have to get back to you. Right. Like now maybe because I grew up and younger generation doesn't know any better because that's all they've grown up with.
Right.
Right. And I don't blame them for that. Like I'm not one who likes to scream and yell at millennials. I think people who do that, I'm like, well, keep in mind you raised them, and if you're the one who allowed all that stuff, you're probably
you can't choose your generation, man.
You're bigger the problem. But for me, like we used to have phones. People would call your house, and we didn't even have answer machines for the wall. Then when you got an answer machine, it's like the greatest thing ever, and you'd leave a message. Hi, Steve, call me back. And sometimes it'd be 2 days later.
Yeah.
But you didn't freak out over it. Now people, if they don't respond to your text in an hour, they're like losing their marbles. And what's wrong with you? You're checking your phone. I'm like, I don't believe, and this is my own personal thing, I don't believe that it's like my phone is there, but I connect with people. And if you know what, if I'm connecting with people in the room, they're more important than the people who text me something. Like, I know you think it's important at that time, and I'm sure I'm guilty of it too, but I don't ever expect an instant return unless it's like my producer, Connor Halley, and it's day of the show. I'm like, hey, buddy, what are we having on the show?
Guests and stuff, yeah.
But even then, if like he's like, hey, man, sorry, I was at the gym. I'm like, yeah, it's okay.
You have a life.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Let's get into your broadcast career, because you have one of the most successful and interesting broadcast careers. Well, first of all, you didn't get into broadcasting until a little bit later. Like, I thought I was late getting into broadcasting when I was like 21, 22, but you had like an 8-year stint in the oil patch. What was the last straw where you said, that's it, I'm going into broadcasting?
And it's funny, like I always wanted to do broadcasting, but I finished playing junior hockey, and you kind of get into the working mode, and then maybe a little bit of lack of confidence or whatever, and you didn't think big picture. But for me, I was working in Killam, and at the time I was working for an oil field company called Premium Oilfield Inspections, and I ran my own unit, which was ultrasonic testing for downhole drill pipe. But in the summertime, when it would slow down, sometimes they would lay off the hands, but then the operators would have to go work on crews together.
Okay.
So I was used to, when I had my own unit, I had my own room in the hotel. And so when you went on the
like
cruise,
an NHL veteran.
Yeah, sure. And as when we went on the tubing crew, there was 4 of you. So obviously they're not going to give you 4 rooms. So you had to room with someone. And I'll never forget his name. He's a great guy. Jason Beatty was his name. And so I remember this. It was in May. And there was hockey playoffs on. Now, the first night I came in, I was tired. I fell asleep. And when I fall asleep, nothing wakes me up. I'm a sound sleeper. So I fell asleep, no problem. The next night, I'm up, I'm watching TV. And actually, sorry, it wasn't May. It was June and the playoffs were over. And there was some movie on. So I'm watching the movie, and Beatty falls asleep. And this guy, when I'm awake, I don't really care, but I can hear him snoring. I'm like, geez, this guy's pretty loud snorer. Now I try to go to sleep. Well, dude, it's impossible. Like this guy's like the old Freddie Flintstone, bouncing out of the bed. He's snoring so loud, shaking the blankets. And finally, like I'm throwing pillows over at him, like, shut up. Yeah. And then he would stop for a bit, right?
It'd start up.
And then start up again. And so finally at 4 a.m, I can't sleep. I take the duvet off my bed. I go into the bathroom. It's a pretty big bathroom. I lay it out on the floor under the sink, and then I roll in, and then I lay it in, and I roll it over top me like a sleeping bag. And so I'm laying there. And I look up, and I'm like, man, there's got to be more to life than this. Like, I can't be doing this anymore. And literally, and I wasn't mad, right? Like, he knocked on the door to wake me up to go to breakfast. I'm like, screw you, come back after breakfast. I need to sleep more. Yeah. And, so we finished the job. And when we got home, I called my mom, and she's high into education and stuff. I said, Mom, I want to go into broadcasting. How do I do it? Yeah. She's like, well, you got to go to Nate. I was like, all right. So then that was pretty much in the summertime. And I figured out then I had to realize I had to go to upgrade because I didn't have good enough marks from high school.
Right.
Like I had 70s, but you needed 80s to get in. There's only 12 kids in radio every year so I could go to Nate in what they called their college prep courses, and you started in late August, and then you could use your midterm marks to apply to get in for the January program for radio. So they would take your halfway marks, and if they were good enough, they would assume that you would maintain those. Sure. So the only course I really needed to upgrade was chemistry, right? Because my English mark was okay, but the chemistry was the low one, so I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. But it was at 11:30, so I couldn't work right in the mornings. Right. And it was done. So I was like, well, I might as well just take some other courses and improve all my marks. So I took math, social, and I took 4 courses, and got in. And because I'm older now, I'm studying. It's easy. I'm ready to go.
You're motivated.
And it was fun. And then so I got accepted, and then I started in school in January of 2000.
So then you get into broadcasting. You're not a lot of people are lucky enough to get out of school and get to learn from a legend in John Short. I mean, that must have been...
Dude, it was unreal. Like I started working with John actually when I was in school. Because I started in 2000, so that was one semester. Then my second semester went in the fall. And then you started your third semester in January. And then your fourth semester in radio is a practicum.
That's right.
So, in the third semester we're starting, it's in January. And there was a guy who was in the final year, and he had been doing on-site producing because John would do his show back at Northlands Racetrack. And I love John, but he was like technically inept, right? And he would joke about it. He's like, dude, I barely plug in a printer. Right. So your job was to be on site, get there early. And back then, it was just the early days of the internet, right? So they had a CP, and you could go on and get like all the stories. There weren't like tons, like there was no TSN.ca and none of these sites. So that had all the feeds, and then you would print off relevant stories. I would go through and find what's John want. And John, of course, was interested in all sports, as was I. So it was great. I'd look at stories. Here's the game resume, printing it all out. That was the only way to do it. I'd print it out, kind of stack it up for him, label it, whatever sport you were. And I was only supposed to work on Oilers home nights because Rob Kerr was his regular guy. And then Rob was started to go to the room. So they needed someone. And then Rob would come back at around 10:30. And then he would just kind of co-host with John, and I would stick with him till the end. And then, so I started in February. And I was like, oh, this is great. Like, because I remember John interviewed me, and all he did was ask me sports questions. Like, this is the greatest sports interview of my life. Like, I'm very comfortable. It's all good. And I used to call John Show. And so I was like, yeah. Man, like, and he remembered me because, Jay's from New Sarepta and whatever. So that was kind of cool. And then I started, and then Rob got really sick for a month. So I was in school, and then I had to work every night. And of course I didn't say no, because I was like, and I actually didn't paid. So that was a bonus, but it was just the experience. And then one of our guests didn't show up. And so John, just asked me a question. So I went on air and I answered to him, and he kind of liked it. So we bantered back, and I'm like, I'm talking to John Short on the radio. Like, wow, this is unreal. And then just after that, he was like, hey, Jason, that was really good. So we just continued it. And then every night he would give me a segment. And then sometimes it would be 2 segments, depending on the night. And, would ask me different opinions and stuff. So obviously I'm coming in, I'm studying, during the day as much as I can, knowing as much as I can about everything. And then I had a practicum, or supposed to be at Ched, and John was like, he found out, he's like, well, why aren't you doing it with me? And at the time, John was at Oldies 1260, and he was buying his airtime from 9 to midnight. So I didn't even think it was possible. Like, I'm like, well, there's really not a program director to sign off on it, but it's just John. He runs the show. So I'm like, well, yeah, I'll do this, like, for sure. I'm like, what can I do? He goes, whatever you want. So I started with him, and I'm like, well, I don't want to start my practicum right now. I don't want to wait till September. Like, let's just get it done in the summer, so I'm done. And then if I have to go work, like, I was fully expecting to go to a small town, like you usually do.
Like everybody did, yeah.
And so I did my practicum, and I got to be like I was producing a show, setting up all the guests, and then I told him, I said, well, I want to go cover the Eskimos. So I would go to Eskimos practice every day. And then I would do a report, like 3 minutes, that he would run on the show. Right. But then I would set up guests with him, and then I got to cover the Eskimos. And then, the next year they started his internet company, anysportanytime.com, and I got to do play-by-play for junior football and junior A hockey and many other things. And it just kind of went from there. I never had to leave. And it was, it was like it was in a small market in essence, because I wasn't on all the time hosting. But then I got my first show was the Gridiron Show, which was a half an hour show once a week talking just football. And I would bring a different Eskimo player on and we would talk about life, not really about football.
Right.
And then that gravitated. And then I started my first show in 2003. So basically 2 years out, I was hosting my own show from 11 p.m. till midnight on CJCA. It was a Christian station, then sports. Not the ideal fit, but you know what? At that point, that was like a small market.
You were starting
You're on
somewhere,
a Christian station, but I was in, and because my show started at 11, I got to go to every Order game. Yeah. And then I would go in the room and I could get back to the station in time to host my show. Right. And so it was an unbelievable learning experience. And then, that ended, and got my first time I was ever fired, which was fine. Like they fired me on a Wednesday and I still had to work till Friday. Like
that's the dumbest thing
so
ever.
Hilarious. But, Will Fraser and I, our last show, we didn't tell anybody because, but all of our songs that we played out of breaks were all like, I'm leaving, goodbye. Right. So a few people caught on by the end of the show. And then I went to Team 1260 at the time in 2004, and I worked with John in a group, and so we bought airtime. And I was 11 p.m. till 1, and John was 9 to midnight, 9 to 11. And then in March 1st of 2005, I talked to John, and I was starting to get decent at sales, enough but it was all going into the pot, and I was like, well, I'm not making enough money here.
Right.
Like I got to survive at some point. So I just said, John, you need to take care of me. I'm 31 years age or 30. I don't know how old that is. I guess 32. So I said, you know what? I just got to try it on my own. And I went to the station manager, Carl Stark and Marty Forbes. And I said, hey guys, like, I want to buy my show like John, can we have an agreement? They're like, yeah, 100%. And so then I started my company in March 1st of 2005 and did that for a year. And then I moved to 9 to midnight for a few years. And then I've been in the drive show since 2008. And it's been much better. I've learned a lot. I didn't know any business background. I basically started with an Excel spreadsheet and said, here's what I got coming in. This is what I got going out. I got to figure it out.
It's so unique. I mean, you go to broadcasting school and you're taught that you're going to go and apply for a job and you're going to go and apply for this job. And you kind of broke a new mold with it of buying your airtime. And that's not easy. I've done that. We did that with the Pipeline show. I've tried to do that with other shows. If you're not great at sales, it's really hard. What do you think? Like, was there ever a time where you're like, geez, I might not be good at this? And what do you think turned around? Because you're so successful at it now.
Yeah. It's funny. My parents, I remember my late father, he told me something once. He goes, hey, and I know it's a saying that probably a lot of people have heard, but he's just like, everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time. And he says, don't ever respect people. Don't be intimidated by them that they're better than you. And so that really helped me because I was older. When I went in the locker rooms, I was never intimidated like, oh, geez, this is an Eskimo or an Oiler. I was just like, they're just people. And I think that helped me, gain, because you got to garner trust in relationships. But from a business standpoint, I was too naive. It's kind of funny when they talk about, like rookie hockey players are like, well, yeah, they're too naive to know that whatever. And I think that was the case for me. Like Bob Suter was a guy who I went on some sales calls with John when I had to do some sales with them. So I got to learn a little bit of it. But a lot of my sales was like, I still don't think I'm a great salesman. I just try to be straightforward and honest and say, hey, this is what I have a very simple sales sheet. It's probably too simplistic to be honest, but it works for me. And, there is a benefit for sure when you're the host of the show and people know it. So that helps and you get to talk to the right people. But, I've made some mistakes in sales for sure. And, lost a few clients because just, not servicing the client as well as I should have. So that was a real big learning thing. But the best thing I got from John was I actually learned some things from him on how to not conduct business, because he told me himself that the mistakes he made was he didn't separate business from personal relationships. Friendships, yeah. And so he had some people that would kind of take advantage of him. They'd sign contracts and never pay.
Yeah. I've had that too.
And I was just like, oof.
With a friend, yeah.
So that was the one thing, like I made contracts because John had verbal contracts. So I made a lot of, now I still have some verbal ones with guys who've been on my show for 10 years. So it's different. But at first I was like, geez, I don't even know what a contract looks like. So I had one of my buddies who was an MBA, so he made me a contract. And then we kind of started to go from there. So it's been fascinating to learn a lot of different business stuff because radio's allowed me to go with Oilers Nation, right? And I'm one of the owners of Nation Network, and dabble in Thunel Noodle and different things like that. So it's really opened my eyes to things that I never thought possible, and I really like it because I get to learn. Like I get bored pretty quickly, so this way, like my show is different every day, and now I've got some business partners in Jay and Clark that I learn a lot from, that they know way more than me. So you try to want to surround yourself with people who know more than you in some aspects, and then that can help you learn more.
Broadcasting in the industry has changed so much as far as, we talked about, when you started, it was calls. And then the emails a little bit, and now texts that come in, and Twitter. And with that comes assholes. And people that are, the amount of times I had people say to me, go kill yourself on a text message. And I'm like, after me talking about my mental health issues, it's like, why are people like this? How do you deal with it? Because listen, you get a lot of texts. I don't know if anybody's told you to go kill yourself, but like, have you changed in how you deal with that person, that kind of texter?
I like a good debate. Anyone who knows me knows that. So, I would debate a lot with trolls. I don't do it anymore. But there's certain things. Somebody mentioned my wife once. Yeah. And in hindsight, I should have done it, but I called the person, right? From a private number, and they answered. And I said a few things, and I said, I know your number. I said, you want to take shots of me? Take it all day. You ever mention my wife? We got a real problem. Right. Never happened again. Now that wasn't the best thing.
Struddy did that once too. He said,
and I've done some investigative journalism from somebody, because there was this guy who was just. And I had Meg work for me, so sadly, because I was very proud. I hired a female. I wanted a female. Meg was really good, and then I had Allison Curry after that. And I've still been looking for a great. There's just not many in it, but like if there was, let me know, and like I would definitely look to get them involved, because I think they have a really good insight. But there is what guys would say to Meg, right, or about her on our text line, and I was like Big Brother. You know how it is. You just like whoa, right? And so there was this one guy who turned out he was coaching a bantam AA team in town, because his number, if you put it into the search engine, his number came up with his name, because his name was on the team's website, his number, and I was just like, oh yeah. So his email's there. So I said, hey, we have all your texts. We have this. I said, if you ever text anything like that again, I'll make sure that every parent on your team. I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to be like, here's what your coach says to a female. Yeah. Never heard a text from him again. Right now, part of me was like, maybe I should have done more and told all the parents, but I'm like, I don't really need to be a rat.
Maybe he changed.
Hopefully, because you're living in fear a little bit then. Yeah. Because it was easy to track him down, right? But for the most part now, like, when someone's like, hey, if you can disagree with me all day long, that's awesome.
You could just do it respectfully, though, right?
And sometimes, even if they want to go at you, I don't mind it, right? I kind of like it sometimes, because I learned in radio school, the best advice I ever got from Ron Durda. He says, if everybody likes your show, Gregor, and you're an opinion show, then you don't have a good show.
Well, the Howard Stern effect, right? More people listened to him that didn't like him, because they wanted to see what he was going to do next. And that's just people hated him, but listened to him because they wanted to do that. Okay, farm life. I know we talked a little bit about one-timers. I had Dusty Nielsen, and did you guys ever sit and talk farm? You guys, like, you both grew up in farms. You don't see each other a whole lot probably in the day, but
I talked once. I'm not sure if Nilly's necessarily like we're a different type of farmers. Like, okay. They lived in the trailer park, he told me. Okay. And they had some farm land, but I don't know if he's ever birthed a cow or anything like that.
Well, he was big in 4-H, he said, so I don't know.
Whoa. The Nilly man was showing cows?
He won a speech contest in 4-H.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so he wasn't showing the cows. Okay.
But listen, when I grew up in Brandon, like my dad grew up on a farm, and he would tell me stories, and I was like, I don't want to be on a farm. Now 44-year-old Dean would love to have a farm, man. If I won the lottery, I'd buy a farm. It's a lot of work, and you're dependent on weather, but was it a life that you loved growing up?
Yeah, like, it was funny because my father and my mom grew up on a farm. She's one of 7 kids, the only girl. She has 6 brothers, and grew up on a farm up in Valley View, Crooked Creek. My dad grew up in Devon and Edmonton, and my dad grew up, pretty poor. And so when him and my mom got married and she really wanted to move to the farm, like my dad honestly kind of jokes like he didn't know a horse from a cow.
Yeah.
And he went to the farm and he just taught himself a lot of stuff, like the mechanical stuff. And then, and he was really good with that. Like my dad was never a scholar. My mom thought later that maybe dad, when he was younger, had a little bit of a learning disability. And so he didn't have a lot of confidence in books, but man, he figured out everything at the farm. It was unbelievable. And the old Case dealership in New Sarepta, my dad would call them and they were great because we didn't have a lot of money. So he couldn't, and then he'd say, and they would kind of help him talk him through, we'll try this and that. And so he would figure it out. Eventually my mom's brothers would come to my dad for advice on their tractors.
Awesome.
Like that was kind of like his big moment. So I saw him and like I loved animals from day one. Like and I like cows from day one. So I like that aspect of it. And then my dad and I, we worked at the farm. He was really good in the tractor stuff. I had no patience for that. And I was really good at the cows. He had no patience for that. So we worked well together. And then some days it was Mount Vesuvius between the two of us. And but I didn't really think of it as that's kind of all I knew and I loved. Like so, Saturdays you got up and you worked, right? But it, whether it was cleaning pens or when slopping the pigs or whatever, that was just kind of that needed to be done. So you didn't really have a choice. And I remember when I was older, my parents, like they didn't really give me a curfew at you're 16, you got a car. And so, my curfew originally was midnight and then, I've come in late a few times. And so finally my mom said, you don't have a curfew, but the rules are you get up at 7.
That's right.
So it's your choice. And trust me, like my parents, like I remember vividly my mom pouring a jug of water on my head because she called down 3 times. I didn't get up and all right. And so your work, and because, it wasn't drinking, but you're staying up till midnight. You're 16. Your body needs a lot of sleep.
Yeah.
And so now you're getting up at 7 or 7:30. Well, you're bagged, right? And so I'm working all day. And so eventually I learned it was like 10 o'clock. I'm like, I don't think I'm missing much here tonight. Or I'd stay home. And then, eventually I didn't have to work every day. Or I'd work long hour with Saturday so I could go out Saturday night and then I have to work Sunday, right? So you kind of adapt and learn things. But like I loved calving season. We did haying for a long time, but for the last 20 years, ever since my father passed away, we had a neighbor who would do all our baling for us. Right. And then, he would take 1/3 of the bales, we would take 2/3, and that's all we needed for our cows. So I didn't have to live by the sword every year of that. But, my mom did have to live by like cattle prices. And, the last few years, thankfully that, and we always got really good prices, but still like when you're getting 98 cents a pound, it's tough to make a living. So it was more of a hobby farm ever for us. It was never like we had, what is it, 250 acres. So it's a decent size, but by farm standards, it's small. Sure. But it was a great thing. And, my mom's 75 now, and this is probably our last year of cows. We've had a conversation with her, and that's like, I know for me, it'll be pretty emotional when I finally get rid of the cows, but that's okay. Life evolves. And, I've talked to a few people like, you know what, hey, maybe I want to take 5 of my cows and put it on your land and rent it. It's close to St. Albert and on the east side of Edmonton, or west side, excuse me. And maybe I could just go out there because I like taking my son out there. Like he was out this past weekend with me and he's just running on the bales and playing, just being outside like for 3 hours. He's like, and he looks at the cows and he sees, he wants to see kind of like, he's old enough now. I said, like, maybe you'll see a calf being born this year. He's like, yeah, Dad. I said, well, we have to sleep over at Grandma's, and he's never had a sleepover at Grandma's yet. So now he's going to have a sleepover at Grandma's, and he can also, at the farm, Grandma, I should say. He sleeps over at Grandma's close, but he doesn't want to sleep at the farm yet because it's in the basement, right? There's no room upstairs, so he doesn't want to sleep in the basement. But now, because he can see a calf being born, and usually you got to stay over there because you got to get up early to do it. So, that's something I definitely wanted him to experience. And then, because even then out there, like he's picked rocks with me, and like he's he's kind of done some work. Like I get him to feed the cows grain, and he's carrying the pail, and he's like, "Dad, it's too heavy." I'm like, "No, you can carry it over here. Way you go." And you just turn your back, and he takes him 5 minutes, but he'll get it. So I find that farm life, just for me anyway, it taught me a work ethic, and I think it's helped me in my life.
I think so. I think it really does. I would go up like for 2 weeks to northern Manitoba to a farm of our family and friends, and the space that we had, quads, we'd play all these baseball games. The only thing I didn't like was it was summer holidays, and I was getting up at 6 in the morning to go clean the pig crap. And the one day we went out to check the cows, and I got stuck and fell face first into all that manure. And I bet you I showered for 4 days. Plus there was like well water, so a city kid doesn't get used to that taste of that water. But I just love the space and
the softness of the water is unreal.
That's true. Yeah,
to shower in
the open space and the activities that I had a backyard, but it wasn't like a whole back field where you had a baseball diamond almost.
Well, last summer I took my son and his little buddy, the neighbor guy who's 5, and they came out to the farm. And now they're old enough, like there's nothing they can get in trouble with. So I just let them run. And so when you're 5 and you get 3 acres of land, they were in the barn and then they were running and walk and they were climbing the tractor. There's no keys. It's not going to start or anything. But they're playing games, and then there's a sandbox. And they're playing there, and my neighbor, her son's not a real big talker, she says. Well, he got home that day and she goes, at dinner time, he's never talked like that before. He's telling all these stories. And it was just like, he was like, Mom, like, it was so far I couldn't see, like there was no other houses. And I think a lot of kids, they don't, it's just such a big, like 4 or 5 acres.
There's wide open space. Yeah.
And they're just running and they're tired. And so, you know, like he'll be coming out this summer again. He keeps asking about it. And so I think that's something I wish every city kid would just get to experience for a week, to live on a farm. Just not like the work is one thing, but just that much land. And it's just like, wow, like this is crazy. Because you go to a big park and it's awesome, but it's just a different thing.
We would have these like 3-hour-long paintball games because you could hide so many places. Okay, let's wrap up with this. We'll circle back to the Oilers. Give me your prediction for the Edmonton Oilers the rest of the way. What do you think happens?
Well, I said at the start of the year they would make the playoffs, so I'm going to stick with that. And I think the Oilers, they will finish second. You know, for whatever reason, somebody's going to finish first. I don't even know who. But I think the Oilers will finish second in the Pacific. It's super tight. And, you know, I look at the matchups. I think they match up well against Arizona. I think they match up really well against Calgary, actually. Yeah. Vancouver. The one matchup, because of experience, might be Vegas. That isn't ideal, even though Vegas, I think, might have the weakest defense core in the Pacific Division. But, you know, they got Fleury's got a ton of playoff experience. So I think Edmonton's going to win a round in the postseason this year.
All right. Do you think that we will get a Battle of Alberta playoff?
Oh,
like imagine that last game of the season, meaning Game 7 for that either team. How good that will be. I mean, it
would be the greatest for every generation of hockey fans in Alberta, because the young ones, younger generations have never seen a real battle. Like I had so many younger people, even around the station, people like, now I know what you guys, when you talk about like intensity and like real animosity, they're like I wanted to kill Tkachuk and I'm not even playing. I'm like, that's what you want, right? You want, so you despise them in a healthy manner, right? Like don't go and, you know, like threaten them online or anything like that. Just enjoy, like, and chirp your friends that are Calgary fans and vice versa. Like I think it would be great for both cities to have that, and ideally be the best in the second round, because I do think both markets could use a victory, no question about it. So if they met in the second round, that would be off the charts, because now you've had 2 weeks of it. Now it's just going to amp up, and it would be great. But my gut tells me, for whatever reason, I don't know why, maybe because, you know, I haven't seen a Battle of Alberta since 91. I just, until I see one again, I can't predict it. I would love it, but I don't want to get my hopes up, just for the intensity of that and for fun for a radio show, but fun for everybody, because I think it would really reignite, like the rivalry's gotten back. And like I remember I wrote the article and I thanked Tkachuk and Cassian, like, and people are like, what do you thank Tkachuk for? I'm like, because you have someone you hate if you're an Oilers fan, and if you're a Flame fan, it's the same thing, and you're chirping him. Like that's what it should be about, like a real rivalry. And like, you know, like Toronto and Boston right now, like Toronto fans hate Boston, but what if they beat them? What if they finally got to beat them, right? Or somehow,
at least
Toronto,
they've had playoffs.
Like, what about Toronto and Montreal could face in the playoffs again? And so you need rivalries, and they're built in the playoffs for the most part, unless you have like the rare Tkachuk-Cassian type of thing. So from that aspect, I would love it. I think it would be good for hockey. And trust me, Eastern hockey fans are going to watch good rivalries, just like the West would watch a good, like when Washington-Pittsburgh, it looks like they're going to probably meet in the second round if they both win. I'll be watching that series for sure. Yeah, rivalries are the best, and they're built on playoffs. Greggs, this has been a lot of fun. Best of luck always at TSN 1262 until 6, Monday to Friday, and everything else that you have going on in life. Congratulations, man. Well, hey, Dino, thanks, man, and great stuff with you doing with Podcast Alley, and keep it going. What do you say when your family goes away? Who do you know when you got nowhere to go? This is the Sports and More podcast with Dean Millard. Got nothing to drink. How do you smile? You're no longer a child.
That's the sweet sounds of Sweet Bejesus with I Got Time. Kevin Dabbs, Christian Gutzis. Their debut album is Policeman's Creek, and it can be found on Apple Music. And big thanks to them. They are the official music of Sports and More, the podcast. All right, so before the interview with Jason Gregor, we told you the hint for the Acme Meat Market Trivia Contest. A gift card from Acme Meat Market up for grabs. You can say hi to Corey, Amanda, their staff at the Ritchie Market in Edmonton at 9570 76th Avenue. Their website is acmemeatmarket.ca, and they've been around since 1921. Here's the question. How many playoff rounds did Gregor predict the Oilers to win this year? How many playoff rounds did Gregor predict the Oilers to win this year? Hit me up on any of our social media feeds on Twitter at Duck Millard, Sports and More Podcast on Instagram, Sports and More 35 on Facebook, or you can email me sportsandmorepod@gmail.com. And if you're right, you could be going home with a gift card from Acme Meat Market. All right, before we sign off, we have to give you the ultimate franchise fantasy sports poll question. This is up on Twitter at Duck Millard. You can have your vote. Will Ovechkin catch Gretzky in goals? I thought Gregor had a pretty compelling argument for why he will. When you break down the numbers, I mean, Alex Ovechkin, he can score 28 goals very easily in that final season. So do you think Ovi will catch Gretzky in goals? Your choices are hell yeah or no way. You can vote on Twitter at Duck Millard. So far, we've had 73 votes, and it's 54.8% in favor, hell yeah, to 45.2% no way. So more people think he can do it. I thought I was a no way guy for a long time. Now I'm kind of in the middle. I don't think he's going to do it, but I think he could come close. It's interesting when we were talking about Craig Laughlin mentioning he could be the last guy to get to 700 goals. Yeah, could be possible. Anyway, find out more details about Ultimate Franchise Fantasy Sports at uffsports.com, and you can find out how to bid on one of only 31 franchises. Just a few left available for you to get into, and there will be CFL coming out as well. We're gonna have Tony from UFF Sports on the show in the next couple of weeks to explain a little bit more about what it is. But looking forward to the CFL and baseball down the road, and there's so much that they have going right now. So check it out, uffsports.com. And I just want to say thank you very much to Jason Gregor for dropping by Podcast Alley for this episode. I love everybody's backstory. I absolutely love digging into it. And that's what I love about these podcasts is I can not just talk 15 minutes about the Oilers with somebody. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please subscribe and leave us a review. It's very important for us to find out how to make this show a lot better. And if you'd like to advertise on the show, please email me, sportsandmorepod@gmail.com. That is sportsandmorepod@gmail.com. All right, that's going to wrap things up for us here on Sports and More. We've got some great guests lined up in the next few weeks. Nabil Karim of ESPN is scheduled to join me very shortly. I'm really excited about that possibility. Thanks very much for listening, everybody. Have a great week in sports, and just remember, playtime is over.